It's now the first session. Neil Silberman, president of ICOMOS ISIP, will chair the session.
The first speakers are from the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, Xu and Janet Brunckhorst, who will be dealing with the question of Asian culture internationally with a paper entitled Reimagining the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco.
About new technology, I'd like to start by saying I will say anything but technology during my part of the presentation. Our joint presentation, the technology part really will be taken care of by my colleague, Janet Brunckhorst. And I will talk about, in a conceptual level, what our vision for the museum is. But this, again, provides me a great opportunity to learn from all of you about the cutting-edge technology. I'm very interested in technology, even though I'm not an expert in that. As you know, the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco is located right at Silicon Valley. And the one big part of the museum director's job is to raise money. So I deal with the shakers and movers of Silicon Valley quite often. So often the case I ask them, in order to try to make a connection, people still think art, which my background is, I'm an art historian, art and technology are the two words and they may not meet. So often the case I ask some of my future patrons is that how do you describe the best quality of your product? If you think your product is so good, what kind of phrases you use? What I want them to say is it's a state of art. So technology is so good you run out of words, but you have to borrow the word art to describe how good it is. I think this is the interface where technology and art connects. This defines what the human quality is, the art. I think this drives, of course, all the technology that we try to amplify, develop, improve to present to the museum's content as well as to ensure sustaining preservation and conservation of the common human heritage. So with this, let me get to our own museum. The Asian Art Museum of San Francisco is located in the Civic Center, right at the center of civic life in the Great Bay Area. It's an institution that was founded in 1966 by a gentleman by the name of Avery Brundage. And he probably was more famous by being the first and only American that ever served as the chairman of the International Olympics Committee from 1952 to 1972. Of course, Olympic Games is where humanity came together. So from day one, the museums share the same mission, of course, in a much smaller way. They're a bridge to understanding. They're a connecting hub of the cross-cultural understanding. And right now, our museum is located in the Civic Center, not the place where it was founded. 9 years ago, we moved to this new location, which was a former public library. It's converted into a world-class facility for a museum. As we know, library is also the hub of human knowledge. So I think with the mission of us being connecting people through knowledge, I think it defines who we are and what we want to do. And our museum holds one of the most comprehensive collections of Asian art in the world. And the collection spanning 6,000 years, its scope and breadth enables the museum to provide an introduction to all the major traditions of Asian art and culture. And that is very important, I think, in the United States, because not many institutions are focused on Asian art. There are many wonderful museums that have strong Asian art departments. But for a museum that focuses primarily on Asian art, particularly interplay between the Asian art and the culture, I think that is very important. If we look at the museums in Asian nations, most of the museums in Asian nations are primarily focused on their own cultural heritage. Not many museums have the pan-Asian scope. So in that regard, I think our museum does have a role to play on the international stage beyond the Bay Area as well as beyond the United States. And here is just a view of our installation in the galleries. And of course, we shot those pictures during the museum, during the time that museum is closed, in order for you to see clearly what our installation look like. Of course, museums is about people, for the people, and by the people, if I may quote the Gettysburg speech. And we are known as a place where people enjoy Asian culture and Asian art, and where art and culture come alive. I think that is very important. However, like every institution, we have our own challenges and opportunities. So let me focus on one challenge in particular, and that is a misconception that we are a niche museum. So our museum is called the Asian Art Museum. This gives most of the public an immediate impression this is a niche museum, this is a museum of special interest, this is a museum that caters to the people who from Asia or for whatever reason have life experience in Asia or interested in Asia, not beyond those categories. So we're specialized niche museum. And this is a misconception that we want to change. And part of a misconception is very much because we have not done enough on our own part to change that. So in order to do that, we have a new vision that to develop that vision actually relates to my work. I just very briefly that I have been a curator most of my career for about 30 years. And 4.5 years ago, I finally made a switch from a curator to a museum director by arriving at the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco. So my first job is to work with all the stakeholders, including our staff, our board, our visitors, our communities, and our politicians, to develop this new vision. I started so by asking a very simple question. What do we mean by Asia? How do we define it? Do we define Asia by ethnicity? Or do we define that by geography? Or do we define by both, right? And there's a changing definition. If you ask any number of people here what Asia means, probably we'll have a whole range of geographical definition where Asia begins or where Asia ends. But we understand the geography is artificial. It's a man-made geography. So the conclusion that we had is that as a museum, that we will no longer define Asia by ethnicity nor geography. We define Asia only by connection. That anything that has any connection or something to do with Asia is within the scope of our activity. For example, talking about contemporary Asian art, I don't really care the artist's skin color. As long as his or her work has something to do with Asia tradition or particular medium or particular iconography, then that's Asian art, in my view. And because as a museum, if you have visited our museum, you will understand that our installation is organized by culturally specific installation, Chinese art, Korean art, Japanese art, Southeast Asian art, South Asia art, so on and so forth, Himalayan art. And what we have not done enough is the interconnectivity between those cultures, right? So our new vision comes up with Asia as our lens and art as our cornerstone. We spark connections across cultures and through time. The only word that really matters here is the connections. And the connections manifest itself in principle in two dimensions. Across cultures, the connection between the Asian cultures as well as connection between the cultures in Asia with the cultures in the rest of the world. We can easily think of Silk Road. We will hear amply about later on, connecting from China all the way to the other end of Asia, if you will, and the Near East and further to Europe, right? And by extension, and also the maritime trade is really globe, from Asia to Africa to Europe, across Pacific through Pacific Rim, from Philippines to the New World. So I think that Asia is always there in the connection. So it gives me the greatest satisfaction if someone came across our museum and say, hey, this is a niche museum, Asian art museum, and I'm not Asian, It's not my skin color. My ancestors or not, neither I have ever been to Asia. I've never even eaten Chinese food, which is unlikely. And so it's for somebody else. Great museum, but for somebody else. I say, sir or ma'am, if you give me half an hour, let's discover together. There's a connection with Asia existing with everyone, and may or may not be known to you or to me. And we can, through common discovery, we can make that journey. So that's one dimension, horizontal dimension, if you will, interconnectivity among cultures. The other is through time, connecting art to life. From art made several thousand years ago to the living art that we speak today. Because no matter what the artist is conscious or not, his or her work must be influenced by the circumstances where he or she grew up or where he or she lived. And that is a very powerful connection. In my view, art, no matter how old was it made, it is always lively. It will always have new life because each generation have new questions and new perspective. So for us, for example, we're launching a major contemporary art effort, and some of very loyal supporters ask me, Jay, are we changing the direction? I think yes, but we're innovating, not 100% a turn, but adding a new dimension. Let me mention only one thing to you, which is when art was made, it was always contemporary. Nobody ever made ancient art. So, and of course, to manifest this vision, the whole institutions went through a branding campaign. And branding, to say the least, is not about logo, even though logo is a part of the visual identity. It's really about define who we are, put our visitors first and foremost, how the visitor's journey will begin from where they're at home, through the web, and going through the museums, and then returning to their home or where they find the after museum activities, right? And so this whole journey is the focus of our effort. Put visitors first and foremost. So we come up with this brand promise is awaken the past and inspire the next. I think that I can use many examples, but Chinese artist Xu Bing probably is an apt example. You know, he is a artist who fundamentally interested in language, in linguistics. I know that we have a session there as well. And he also invented the square alphabet of English, which they are looking at now. So his art is really giving the most fundamental entity of Chinese civilization, which is language, its new life. At the same time, he connected Chinese linguistic expression with the alphabetic expression of the Western world. So right there, you see the two dimensions of our new vision, connecting temporally as well as connecting culturally. And awaken the past, giving new life to Chinese language, and also inspire the next. For example, that his art not only inspired other artists, but also even inspired the fashion industry as well. So, and this is another example that we did a magnificent show of Maharaja, 300 years of Indian's royal court. At the same time, we commissioned a young artist from the Pixar animation studio, which is also based in the Bay Area. And we just give him the material, ask him to come up with something. What he comes up is, of course, there's something that really defines the royal activity, royal processions. And the one that on the right is the mural that he created for this exhibition, which in doing so, providing audience, particularly young audience, with an entry point. Entry point meaning that something our young audience are familiar with, connecting to an art form that sounds very unfamiliar. So this is how we try to make the connections. Again, awaken the past and inspire the next. And of course, that's what we do. Need a logo to express, to summarize that what we want to achieve through our new brand, a new vision. And this is something that we come up in inverted A. Of course, A means Asia. Inverted A, we want to express through our new logo that is that we are bold, that we are willing to experiment, we are willing to someday being successful by making a lot of mistakes perhaps on the way, that we have a new perspective. Of course, for those of you who are very familiar with technology and the mathematics, you understand that inverted A means for all. We want to make sure the Asian Art Museum is not a niche museum. Asian Art Museum is a general museum with an Asia focus. So I think this is the way we want to do it. So let me just show you in the last 2 slides the versatility of our new logo, and because we want our logo being a living thing, like the art that we present. So you could juxtapose on it any kind of artworks, new and old, from all the cultures, from the living programs in the museums, from public activities, ancient art, contemporary, so on and so forth, even Easter eggs. So Asian for all is our brand promise for our audience, and we want to doing so really to enlarge our audience. Audience is the key. We have a very, very loyal audience, but we are concerned about our audience not necessarily expanding as fast as we like, and our average age is not young enough. We both want we want people from all ages, particularly, and not only sustaining the loyal audience we have, but the young, the school kids, the youngsters who are really at the cutting edge, at the forefront. So over the course of the last year, that after our brand launch, that we achieved an array of successes, and one of which is a major manifestation of a contemporary program in our museum, not only within the museum facade, but just in the public square that's called Civic Center Square, between us and the City Hall. And you are looking at the Red Lotus by a Korean artist as part of our claiming of the public land as a museum's stage. But we have one huge piece that was missing. I may not say missing, because I want to give my staff some credit. We are doing quite well in that regard, but it's a piece that needs a lot more work, and we're only at the beginning of it. That's why Janet and I are here to learn from all of you. And that's the piece about internet. So I'm going to hand this over to Janet. Thank you very much.